Welcome to the Ruby on Rails tutorial. I'm Michael Hartle, author of the Ruby on Rails tutorial book and presenter of the Rails tutorial screencasts. In this first lesson, from zero to deploy, we'll start with an empty text editor and end by deploying an application to the live web. I'm going to get started by opening up my development environment. So that's at c9.io. This is the Cloud9 IDE, and I strongly recommend using this for the Rails tutorial unless you have a preferred environment that already has Ruby and everything else set up, because it's really quite a lot of work to get a Ruby installation with Rails and so on working. Whereas with this Cloud IDE, it's all set up for you. And the way to do that, if you are going to use Cloud9, is to first sign up for an account, which I obviously didn't have to do, but you'll have to do that if you don't have one already. And then you click on Create New Workspace, like this. Now, it's very tempting at this point to click on this Ruby on Rails icon here, this logo. And I really want you not to, because unfortunately this installs a particular version of Rails that may or may not be compatible with this tutorial. I hope that this one over here is even more tempting, railstutorial.org. This is specific to this tutorial. So you click on that, and then you want to name it Rails-tutorial. It's important to make this a dash and not an underscore, because otherwise you'll have some problems doing redirects later on. And then I recommend making it private, just so you don't have to worry about secret keys or passwords leaking out. Click on Create. Now it's spinning up a new workspace here. And there it goes. It's ready to go. Let's start editing. I don't need this tab anymore. And here we go. This is the Cloud9 IDE, and you can see it starts with this README file that's specific to the Rails tutorial. You can even open it up in a new tab if you want. But we're actually not going to need the README right now, or really ever. We also have a couple of tabs down here. One of them is this tab that we don't need. It has to do with JavaScript, which isn't going to be relevant, but we can close that down. We definitely are going to need this tab. So let me sort of explain the anatomy of what we're looking at. I guess I lied before when I said we weren't going to need this. I'm going to want to use it briefly right now. So there are basically three areas here on this IDE. There's this text editor area, this is sort of the main area. Then there's a file system browser over here on the left, which we can actually hide by clicking on it. And then there's a terminal down here. Now this is actually a Linux terminal, and we'll be covering quite a bit of the simple Unix commands in this tutorial. So for example, we can see what's in this directory by typing ls, which is list. So it's this terminal that's going to let us install Rails. So what we're going to do is use the gem command, gem install. So gem is a command that comes with a Ruby package manager called RubyGems. So this is how you start with a new gem installation, gem install Rails. And now it's very important that you use the exact version in your own development environment that's used in the tutorial. And there are actually two ways to get that to work. So I'm going to show you, first of all, we're going to install the version of Rails that's most current right now. So Rails 4.2 is, as of this moment, in beta 1, but you should not use the version shown here. Instead, you should use the version shown at version.railstutorial.org, which is just the first listing in the Rails tutorial book. So just hit return, and I'm going to edit out some of the time here, but you shouldn't be worried if it takes a couple minutes to install everything. All right, the installation is complete, and at this point I'm just going to clear this. That's Control L, by the way. I'm going to try to teach a lot of these little tips and tricks. That's a useful one for clearing the screen. Another one is up arrow, which shows the previous command. I just wanted to draw your attention to this -v. I should have mentioned that more explicitly. This is just for the version. So this is actually a general thing with gems. You can install a specific version using this -v flag. So at this point, I want to create a new Rails skeleton application. You can close this down here. And the way to do that is with the Rails new command. Now, you're tempted at this point, perhaps, if you've done any sort of Rails development before, especially, to type Rails new, but that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the exact version number that we just installed. And I'm going to call this application Hello App, because we're going to be making the web version of what's called Hello World. So it's Rails' new Hello app, and then with this version number, so that you're guaranteed to be compatible. And again, this needs to be the version you just installed, but we're about to install a slightly more up-to-date version. So you can see one thing that it's doing here, it's running what's called bundler. It's running bundle install. So this is installing all the gems needed by the new Rails application we just created. By the way, if you want to see the whole screen, you can always do this. You can just maximize it like that. But usually it's not important to see the whole thing. Great, so now the bundle install command is completed. And if we go over here, we can actually see that a whole bunch of files have been generated. So this is the skeleton for a new Rails application. This is the main directory actually that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the tutorial, but we'll be touching almost all of these at some point. So this is the app directory, and you can see app controllers, helpers, mailers, models, views. We'll be using almost everything in this directory, or this directory structure. And in fact, one of the nice things about Rails is that it has this standard directory structure that's fairly stable from one version to the next. And so that means you're really oriented immediately with any new application you encounter. At this point, I'm going to change directories using the cd command. And I'm just going to change into this hello app directory. Now, you can actually type it out like this. That will work, but basically every command line terminal I know of has a tab completion. So you can just start it, and you can hit tab, and it will complete it like that, which is pretty cool. Especially saves you time with longer directory names. So this is the directory. Now I just want to list the contents, and you can see that if you look at these guys, that was 3 clicks, by the way, to get this line highlighted. You can see that these are basically the same things that we see here in a slightly different configuration. Now the thing I want to open up here is the gem file. This controls which gems are associated with this particular application. It basically says to the system, here are the gems needed for a particular Rails app. So gems are in Ruby, or sometimes in a language like C that can be interfaced with Ruby. And these version numbers will vary. You will not see the same version numbers here. But I've got a trick, which is to use a gem file with the versions that I control directly. So I'm going to do hello app gem file, so hello-app-gemfile.railstutorial.org, and this forwards to the current version. Now right now it's the same version as is used in the tutorial, but this will change, and it will be very likely that you'll see different versions here. But as long as you copy them in, I'm just doing Command A, Command V to paste these in. As long as you use exactly the same versions, you should get the same results shown in the tutorial. Now, it's not at all important at this stage to understand what's going on in this file, but just as long as you follow the directions that you see here, you should be able to get the same results. So at this point, I'm going to install these gems using bundler. This is via the bundle command. Ordinarily, you would just type bundle install, or indeed just bundle. But in this case, I actually do want to prevent the installation of gems that are only used in production. So these are gems that are used on the production environment, but that we don't necessarily want to install locally. Now, actually, this will work on the Cloud IDE, but it might not work generally. So what you do at this point is you give it a flag without production. And this is what's called a remembered option, which means on subsequent invocations of bundler, you don't have to put this option in again. It will just work automatically. Now, one thing you might notice about this gem file is that it uses exact version numbers. These are the version numbers of the gems. It uses exact version numbers for all the gems. This is not the most common way to specify gems in general. Usually you'll see other syntaxes inside these gem files indicating some gem range, or that it has to be greater than or equal to, or something like that. If you want to know the details of that, which I certainly recommend learning about at some point, take a look at the Ruby on Rails tutorial book, which, as a reminder, is available for free in an online version at railstutorial.org/book. But those sort of niceties are not particularly important for the main line of advanced. So at this point, we've got a working gem file, and we're going to content ourselves with that. There's one other comment, which is that this is not the same gem file used in the first part of the first chapter of the Rails tutorial book, but this in fact has all of the gems needed for the entire chapter. And or in this case, the entire lesson. And that's going to be a general rule. So just in order to avoid the headache of having to do one gem at a time, the beginning of any lesson that creates a new application, which really just happens in the first 3 lessons, will just install all the gems all at once. But if you're following along in the Rails tutorial book, then you can add the gems incrementally, which is how I would usually do it when developing in real life. So at this point, we're ready to run an application on our development server. So this is our first taste of an actual web application. So the way to do that is with the Rails command, Rails, and the word server, or you can also do just S for short. So just for clarity, I'm going to use the long version, but there's a table in the book that has the short versions of everything. I may use the short versions later on too. Now, if you're just running this on your local development machine, this is all you need to type. But on the Cloud IDE, we have to give it a little bit more information. We have to tell it what's called the binding IP address, and that's $IP. And we also need to give it a port. P port. And actually, I would like to, well, I can show you what's going to happen here. So let's start up the Rails server. All right, at this point, you might get this little notification if you're using the Cloud IDE. Do not click on this. This will not work. Use the instructions that I'm about to show you, which are the same as the instructions in the Rails tutorial book. You can close this down, and you want to click up on Share and click on this here. Actually, why don't I just show you why you don't want to do that. This is Control-C to exit. That's how you exit the server. You restart it. So if you click on this, this is what happens. Oh wow, it actually did work. That's amazing. Since when does that? They changed that. It's now working. That's amazing. Okay, well, I generally don't recommend doing this. I'm really surprised that worked. I really thought it didn't work. Okay, well, you will be tempted to click on this even more because it does apparently work. But this is not the way I recommend to do it. I think what you should do is close this, and then go to Share, and then I'm actually not sure why these are public. Let's just let's unclick these, and I'm going to click on this and then open it up. So I like having it run in a normal browser tab. In particular, I don't like having it at this aspect ratio, so I'm going to change this up and change the size to make it look like a normal web page. This is what I would normally look at a web page with in this 1024 by 768. Right, so this is an actual application running. It's actually on the live web. It's behind a login wall, but it's running in a development environment. So this is our development server, and if sometimes I say local server, this is the one I mean. I mean this thing here. Now, at this point, there's something I want to show you. I want to show you what $IP and $port do, and the way to show you that is using the Linux command echo. Or it's a Unix command. I sometimes switch back and forth. This is in fact a Linux terminal, but a lot of the commands are common to various other kinds of Unix, including OS 10 on Macintoshes. But I can't do that right now because the server is running in this tab. So what I'm going to do is open up a new terminal. And I actually like to standardize on having my first terminal tab be the one I'm actually working in. So here I have to cd into the hello app directory. Okay, so this is the hello app directory, and I wanted to show you echo. So I can do echo hello. This just echoes the result of the string to the screen. And this is not particularly important for your understanding, but I just wanted to show you that echo IP shows the IP number, and echo port shows the port number. We're never actually going to use this, but just in case you're curious, this is the sort of thing you can do with the command line here. Let's go back to our development application here. This is just the first application that automatically gets generated by Rails New. And let's click on About Your Application's Environment. This just has some information about the Ruby version, the Rails version, and so on. Again, it's likely that your exact versions will differ here, but this shows that something is working here, that this isn't just a random page. It actually is connected to our application. It's not very exciting, though. So starting even in this first chapter, I want to make a change. I want to just give you a sense of actually having control over what this web page says. And in that context, I'd like to discuss a little bit about how Rails structures web applications. Rails uses an architecture for structuring web applications called Model View Controller, MVC. And we'll be discussing this in a lot more detail later on in the tutorial, but just to give you a high-level overview, there are these three pieces of a web application. There's a controller, which essentially handles requests from a browser and returns HTML to those to the browser. And the controller talks to the model, which then talks to the database. So the model is where you have data persistence. This deals with data models, things like users. So when you have an email and password field, for example, on a sign-in form or login form, that's all happening in the model. And the actual pages themselves, though, are being generated by views. So essentially what happens with a typical request is you'll go to the controller, it will ask the model for some information, that information will be passed to the view, which will render some HTML, and then that will be sent back to the browser. Now, right now, we're actually not going to be doing anything with the model or even with the view. We're just going to be making a change in the controller. So let's go back to our IDE. And in fact, we can get a sense of where now that I've given you that information that we're going to be dealing with the controller, you can actually figure out where it has to go. If you look at app, you can probably guess that it's going to be somewhere in the controllers. And there's only one controller. There's this concerns directory, but there's only one controller. So somehow, this controller is going to let us change what this page says. So that's our goal. So we want to actually make this page say something that we're telling it to say rather than just this default. And we're going to, in a grand tradition of computer science, make a hello world page. So it's just going to be a page that returns the text hello world. Now ordinarily, you would render this sort of text using a view, but since this is so early, I'm just going to render it inline, essentially putting the view right inside the controller. And the way to do it is to define some function that returns the value that we want to display on the web. So I'm going to call it hello, def hello, and actually let me show you this. If you do def tab, it'll actually complete it for us. There we go. I'm just hitting tab again. So at this point, I'm going to render some text. Oh, by the way, this is just the kind of thing that it's a detail that I think is important to know about. Ruby is, by default, uses two spaces to indicate indentation. So I just want to make that change globally for my projects. I'd actually already had it configured down here for Ruby, but I think it's a good idea to use the right global setting. Okay, so if you didn't have exactly the same result, that's partially why. Okay, so def hello. Now what I want to do is render some text, and the way to do that in Rails is with render, and then we give it some text. Again, all of this detail, all these like little things like what this render is, what this text colon means, we'll be talking about a lot more later in this tutorial. So this text I'm going to have say hello world with an exclamation point. And this is just a matter of style. I actually don't like having this blank line. I like having the ends just all be all the way to the far left. So now I'm going to save it. And what I want to do is arrange for this page right here to say hello world. All right, the way to arrange that is to use a file called the routes file. So we need to find the router, which is in config routes. And what we want to do is configure what's called the root route. So this here is sometimes just called slash, because if you put a slash here, it's the same page. So we want to configure this root route so that it's connected to this rendering of text. And if you look down here, I can search even. That was Command F to find. And you can see that it says you can have the root of your site routed with root. So I'm going to uncomment this. And this is the name here of the controller, and that here is the application controller. And then this is the name of what's called the action, and that, in fact, is what this is. This is a general Ruby function, but in the context of the application controller, or indeed any controller, this is called an action. And so I'm going to say hello, save it, Again, we'll be covering all of this in much more detail later on. So it's just to give you a taste. And now I'm going to refresh this page, and look at that. Hello world. Now at this point, we're actually going to deploy this application to the live web. And in this context, what we're going to do is put the source code of this Hello app under version control. So version control lets us track changes to an application, recover from errors, collaborate with other people, and so on. It's a very powerful kind of software. And specifically, we're going to be using Git, which is the version control system that's really won, at least in the Ruby world, and lots of other places too. I think Git really is the version control system of choice for most people these days. And in the present context, one of the biggest things that Git will give us is the ability to deploy our application with a single command to a service called Heroku. So let me show you how that works. I should mention that at this point you might have to install Git if it's not already on your system. But if you're using the Cloud IDE, it comes installed for free. You can check that using the which command. Which Git tells you where it is. And because this is a new workspace, I need to add some configuration. So I'm going to do git config. Oops, it's a -- global. Of course, you should type your name here, not mine. You need to know your email address. I should mention in this context that if you're going to push this to a publicly accessible repository, this address will be exposed. So make sure just to know that. People will be able to track you down. So there it is. By the way, don't use this address if you're going to email me about the Rails tutorial. I usually use admin@railstutorial.org for that sort of stuff. This is just a little future proofing for a future version of Git. And don't worry if these look kind of complicated. You think, I'm never going to remember all this stuff if I need to configure a new system. Like, I literally use the Rails tutorial. I look this up every time I need to configure a new system. And I think, well, where is this? Oh, I know where it is. It's in chapter 1 of the Rails tutorial. So don't feel bad about it if you think this is too complicated. I'm going to set up an alias here. It's a very common operation in Git. It's called a checkout. And checkout's kind of long. So I'm going to alias it to CO because everyone uses git CO instead of checkout. All right, so that's the one-time setup. And at this point, I'm going to initialize the repository. So this is has to be done once per repository. So the repository is just essentially the collection of files that that you see here in this file navigator, in the context of being under version control with Git. So the way to initialize a repository is with git init. And now we need to add all the files. And that's git add -a, capital A. You might be concerned at this point if you've used Git before that it might be remembering or it might be storing under version control configuration files or log files or things that we don't want stored. But in fact, Rails comes with what's called a .gitignore file. This is a list of files and patterns that the Git will ignore. So I'm going to show hidden files just to show you how to find this thing. And now, let's see where it is. Where is it? Config. Oh, I probably need to refresh it. There we go. And so you can see here the gitignore that gets generated by Rails new. And you can add to this. If you know about Git, you can feel free to add to that. I'm not going to bother for the most part in this tutorial. It's a little more advanced than we're doing here. So anyway, I've added the files, and at this point I can see what that did with git status. I can do this here. So you can see it just added a bunch of files. And so now I'm going to actually make those changes permanent in the sense of actually storing these changes as a single set of operations called a commit. Oops, what happened there? Oh, I see. It wasn't actually. I needed to click in the window. Git commit -m for the message, and I pretty much always just say initialize repository for the first commit message. Now we can just do git log and see what happened there. And so the commit is has this long identifying string, and then it has the commit message, initialize repository. I just want to give you one example of the kind of thing that Git does for you. So at this point, we can say git status, and there's nothing to commit. But what happens if I remove this directory? If I say I just remove the app, say app controllers. By the way, this is the remove command in Unix, rm, and r is recursive, meaning it's going to delete all the subdirectories, it's going to remove all the subdirectories, and f, it means force, which means it basically says, don't ask me for confirmation, just do it. And now, these were important files. I mean, if you look here, I'm just reloading it, and oops, it didn't work, right? I've just broken I've just destroyed it. I mean, I've destroyed the most important files. But Git lets you recover really easily from things like this. To git status, and it tells me the things that were deleted, but what I can do at this point is to check out basically the previous version using the -f or force flag. This is basically the same design as this. Instead of this is a -f here for force. Git checkout -f. Actually, you can do -force. This is the long version, and the short version would be like this. Remember, we set up the alias. It's the same thing though. You can see now it's clean, and if I go back here, oh, it's working again. So this is the sort of thing that can really save you when you make a mistake. Once you have your application under version control, it's a really good idea to push it up to a remote repository somewhere, which is it's a good way to create a backup essentially, and also to add collaborators later on if you want. And sometimes it's just convenient to navigate the commits and so on using a web interface. So we're going to be using a service called Bitbucket. This is one of the two big Git repository hosts out there. The other one is GitHub. GitHub is excellent, and in fact was used in the previous versions of this tutorial. The issue is that I now believe it's important for web application repositories to be private by default, because all kinds of things can go wrong if you expose a repo publicly. You can have things like passwords or secure keys, private keys that get exposed accidentally. And the way that Bitbucket is designed is that you can have private repositories at GitHub too, but they're free at Bitbucket. There are an unlimited number of free repositories. You have to pay if you want collaborators, but we're not going to need collaborators in this tutorial, so we're just going to use Bitbucket for its free repos. We can start by going to bitbucket.org. And I'm going to log in. Of course, you should create an account if you don't have one yet. And at this point, I do want to create a repository. And let's call it Hello App. You can see here, access level, this is a private repository. So that's the key. It's really important that this be private in general. So I'm going to create the repository. And now you can see it says I have an existing project. This will not actually work though, because in order to use this with Cloud9, I need to give Bitbucket what's called my private key. So let me show you how that works. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to give it my public key. So this is a public key cryptography. So there's a private key and a public key. So I need to tell Bitbucket my public key. And so what we're going to do to find that is click around. I'm actually doing this live in the sense that I don't remember offhand how to do this. So this is the kind of thing that I just want to show you how you might figure this sort of thing out. Let's see. Deployment keys. That looks promising. I'm going to add a key here. There we go. And it even tells us copy your key to your clipboard. This part will not work on the Cloud IDE, but this will. So let's try this. I'm going to copy that. Go over here. Here's the key. So here's the public key. Let's copy it. And let's call this Cloud9. Paste it in. There we go. And so now we can go back to our repository. Where is it here? And I have an existing project, because we do have a project. And let's see, cd path to my repo, we already are in the path. Okay, so we need to do this. Git remote add origin. Oop, actually we should refresh this though. I think that it's going to change. No, it did not. Why did it not change? We just added the settings. Deployment keys. It's weird. Will this work? We'll find out. I expected it to say something different. So let's start with this. Okay, and git push-u origin. Now see, this did not work. This is annoying, but this is, I think the benefit of doing it live is that you'll see that you'll see how to recover from something like this. All right, so it should not be prompting me for a password. So what I'm going to do is, I think there's another global setting. I think it's under manage account. Here it is. I think it's this. There's actually a second place to put the key. Oops. Oops, still the wrong thing. This is called jump cut, by the way. Incredibly useful. If you're on OS 10, it stores a bunch of things that were in your buffer. So let's add this key. Yeah. So now it's complaining that I already have registered it. It's probably because of the repo that's registered it. So let's go here, settings, and we wanted to go to deployment keys. Let's delete this. Part of the philosophy of this series is really to show you how things are in the real world, and this is how it goes sometimes. So now, let's see if this works. Add key. There we go, so that worked. Now let's go back to our repository. Yeah, so this is what I expected. So here you can see that it says has the address starts with HTTPS, but here it starts with git at bitbucket.org. So it's a different. Actually, it might complain that the remote already exists too. Let's take a look at this. Okay, remote origin already exists. So let's see if we can guess the answer. What do you think? It's delete? Git remote remove. Git remote remove origin. And now let's try this again. Ah, that worked. Cool. Really, half of dealing with computers is just guessing the answer like that. Now I'm going to push up the repository. I tried to do this before. It's really not that important to understand what these commands do exactly. I mean, we're just following Bitbucket's lead. Now I'm going to say yes. I'm sure I want to continue connecting, but I only have to do that once. It will just work the next time, even for a different repo. Okay. And now it says to do this, but this is only necessary if you have what are called tags, and there are no tags in this tutorial. In fact, I rarely use tags. Probably should use them more. But in any case, we can skip this last line. It doesn't do any harm, though. Just paste it in. In fact, you can just add the whole thing. You can include the comment. So this doesn't do anything, but just goes to show that, oh, that's weird. I'm kind of surprised that it asked me. Well, we're about to test that. I really think it shouldn't be asking me if I want to continue connecting, but we'll find out in a moment because we're going to use Git to actually do something useful. All right, if we look at this application here at Bitbucket, let's look at actually, we just push it up, so I'm just going to refresh the page. And here it is. So it's not very exciting. In particular, there's this area here that says there isn't a README yet. And we're going to fix that in just a moment. But you can see here, if we can look at, say, the source of the file, this stuff like app, bin, config, db, go back here, you can see that's the same stuff. This is just, in fact, let me hide these guys, hide the hidden files. So this is just the directory structure. So you can see that, in fact, we've successfully pushed up our project to the remote repository. But what I want to do now is fix this issue that there's no README. In fact, there is a README file. If you ls here, you can see there's readme.rdoc here, and so rdoc is the Ruby documentation format that evidently Bitbucket doesn't understand natively. And that's okay because really rdoc isn't nearly as commonly used as the one we're about to use, which is Markdown. Very nice, lightweight format. Good for things like readmes. Now, the way we're going to make this change from this rdoc format to a Markdown README is to use a pattern called branching. Now, for this small a change, I would almost never use a branch, but I think it's a good context in which to learn the series of steps for doing a branch and then making an edit and then committing it and then merging the changes back in. This is something it gets especially good at. The way we're going to get started is to create a new branch, which is essentially a copy of our code. Of course, Git is smart. It doesn't copy all of the files. It only copies the things that need to be copied. But we're going to make an area where we can make all kinds of changes, and if we decide we want to abandon them, it's really easy. So we're going to check out a new branch, so we can give checkout a -b. Again, I'm going to type out checkout just because I don't want to rely on people having set up that configuration for the alias, but I recommend doing CO in general. We can just give it any sort of name we want. I'm going to call it modify readme. And we can now see our branches. We've got the master branch, which is the one we pushed up to Bitbucket, and now we've got a new branch, modify readme. So at this point, I'm going to make the change and actually close these guys down. You can see here is readme.rdoc. And I'm going to move this to a different file name. The way to do this in Unix is with mv, but if we do mv, so ordinarily you would do mv readme.rdoc and then the new file name, so readme.md. But if we did this in the context of a Git repository, what Git would think happened is that this file, this rdoc file, got deleted and a new file got created. But we really want Git to be thinking of these as the same file. In this case, it doesn't really matter because we're actually just going to replace the content of the file. But this is a good practice in general. Instead of moving things, you want to do git mv. So we'll rename it inside of the repository. And actually want to close this down. Yeah, so now it's complaining because it says, well, you just deleted it. Do I want to keep it open? I do not. I'm going to do this here. There we go. And I'm going to just select all this text and get rid of it. It's just this is the top level heading. So this is hello world, and I'm just going to put a description of what this file is, or what this repository is, rather. I like to put in new lines just to keep the formatting nice. With Markdown, it doesn't really matter. These are links. This is the link text, and this is the URL of the link. I like to put the trailing slash for some reason. Okay, so let's make that change. Save the results and see what our status is. Good, so there's a change. You can see that there's a rename. I can make this a little bigger. That we've renamed a file and then modified readme.md. So let's make the commit. Now we haven't actually added these changes. We could do that with a git commit, or rather a git add -A. But there's a way to make this part of the commit. We can do just -A. This will not include files that have been added that are completely out of the repository. But for modifications like this -A will include the changes. So oops, I'm going to do -A-m. These can actually be combined. So this is -A, then the message. Improve the README file. And I'm going to show you. For simplicity, the tutorial starts off with -A, then -m, but they can actually be combined like that. By the way, you might notice that I adopt a convention of using the present tense. Technically speaking, it's the imperative mood. It's a command, improve the README file. You'll see all kinds of different conventions. This is the convention that's actually used internally by Git. So this is the convention that GitHub, among others, recommends. But there's quite a bit of diversity in styles. So we've made these changes on this this branch, this modify README branch. You'll notice that at Cloud9, it actually puts the branch name in the prompt, which is useful. But now we want to incorporate those changes into the master branch and push them up to Bitbucket. So the way we do that is with the git merge command. So first we check out the master branch. Git has tab completion, so do git checkout made tab. And now I'm going to merge in modify README. You can see tab completion is really a lifesaver. Great, and now the change is on the master branch. If you'd like, you can remove the branch that we don't need anymore. You can see here's the modify README here. So I'm just going to get rid of that. This is with the dash lowercase d only deletes the branch. This is deletion only if that branch has already been incorporated into the branch we're deleting from. So in this case, this is a safe operation. It deletes it only if it's already been merged. If you want to delete a branch that that might have changes that haven't been merged, you can use a capital D instead of lowercase. So now I'm going to push these changes up. This Control R, by the way, is an amazing reverse search command. I want to find my last push. I actually want one more. Oops. There it is. So this is our git push -u origin. So we and dash all. So all here is all branches, but we will only need the master branch. Origin is Bitbucket, but in fact that's the default. We can just get rid of that. And -u is for upstream or set upstream, which is beyond the scope of this tutorial. Really not that important for our purposes, but you can Google it if you're interested. So in fact, we only need git push. This will push the changes up to Bitbucket. And as I hoped, in fact, it did not prompt me for to say yes to add the SSH key. So if we go up here and refresh, it ought to be a README. Look at that. There it is. That worked. It's pretty exciting. We're done with that for now, so let's just close it down and go back over here. At this point, we're ready to deploy. I mentioned before that we're going to be using Heroku for our deployment. And in this context, we need the Heroku command line interface. You can see that it's already installed on the Cloud9 IDE. If you're not using Cloud9, then you should take a look at the Ruby on Rails tutorial book and follow the pointers to the Heroku documentation on how to set up a new account. That means installing the Heroku command line interface and also signing up for a new account at Heroku itself. Once you've done that, then you can log in. Put in my credentials. There we go. And I also need to add my public SSH key. And it already found it, so that's working. If that doesn't just work for you, then I refer you to the Heroku documentation, and of course you can always Google around, which is the universal algorithm for solving problems like this. But it just worked for me, which is great, which means I am ready to go. All I need to do is create a new application for this. So we've got this here, hello world, running locally. By locally, I mean in development. So what I want to do is put that up on the live web. The way to do that is with the Heroku create command. So let's see what's up there. Just curious as anyone. Ah, right, it's just the default Heroku page. And that's not that surprising because we haven't actually told Heroku anything about our local application. So what we need to do now is to push this up. Part of Heroku create actually configured our system so that, in fact, we can just do git push. Instead of to Bitbucket, we're going to Heroku. Heroku is actually set up as a separate remote Remember we did git remote add origin, so Bitbucket is the origin. This Heroku create automatically added a remote repository at Heroku. So let's see what happens if we do git push Heroku. Same thing. It asks us to verify that yes, we want to remember this SSH key. Oh, and as you can see, in fact, I didn't follow my own tutorial because it's now complaining that perhaps you should specify a branch such as master. Indeed, that is correct. So let's do that. Git push Heroku master. After this first push, we don't have to type master, but the first time we do. As is often the case in the Rails tutorial, I've edited out some of the time there, but you shouldn't be concerned if it takes a couple minutes. But at this point, let's take a look. It says that it's running. It says that it's deployed. I'm just going to refresh this page, and there it is. Hello world. So you can see, here it is, running. Oh wait, let's open it up here. This is the Rails. There it is. Look at that. Hello world. This is running on the development server. It may not seem like there's much of a difference, but this is a world of difference. This is running on a development server that we can't expose to the rest of the world. It doesn't have any sort of production sort of capabilities. And this is running on the live web. This is a real web app that we could deploy. In fact, the Rails tutorial itself runs on a Heroku app as of this writing, as of the screencast. So this is amazing. We've actually, in the span of really not very much time at all, gone from a blank canvas, so to speak, an empty application, and we've added this controller action that renders some text, and we've deployed it to the actual live web. This is the sort of feat that used to be incredibly difficult. Like, there was so much stuff you had to do to deploy an application, not just Rails, but any sort of web application. And it's really testament to the maturity of the technical ecosystem that we can have an IDE running inside a browser that works cross-platform, that we can, just in the span of not very much time at all, deploy an application to the live web. So I hope that you appreciate how amazing this is. This is really an incredible accomplishment. We've come so far just in the span of this first lesson. But it's just the beginning, so stay tuned for the rest of the lessons to learn how to use Rails to make actual dynamic database-driven web applications.